Sefer Bamidbar begins, of course, with Parshas Bamidbar. This is the video shir, Dvar Torah, for the OU All Parsha, Moshe Taragin from Gush Etzion. Bamidbar is always in the shadow. It's almost always in the shadow of Shavuos. Bamidbar, Naso, more often than not, Shavuos falls between Bamidbar and Naso. This year it's in a double shadow because it's 2 days before Shavuos, so we're already in the Shlosh Yismei HaKabbalah, and it is, of course, in the wake of Yom Yerushalayim, which is about to begin in a few hours. It's always in the shadow of Shavuos, of course, and nothing joins both Parshas Bamidbar, the word Bamidbar, Sefer Bamidbar, and Matan Torah, like one of the first Medrashei Rabbah, one of the first Simanim in Medrash Rabbah, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai lemor, Lama b'midbar Sinai shanu chachamim, begimel dvarim nitna Torah be'esh b'mayim uvamidbar. Now the truth is, it's not just that the Torah was given with 3 different metaphors. There's a whole slew of metaphors to try to capture the Torah, because the Torah is too large to be captured even by one metaphor. I mean, metaphors can contain many, many, many layers of meaning. So for example, the most popular, let's take a drink of water while I'm saying it, because it's very hot here in Israel. The most popular metaphor for Torah is water. But there are, I think I once counted, 7 to 10 different reasons that Torah is compared to water. So metaphors are elastic enough to absorb multiple meanings. But even though that's true, and metaphors are flexible and stretchy enough, there isn't one metaphor that can contain all the elements and facets of Torah. So Chazal compare it to water, compare it to wine, compare it to oil, and many different types of fruits, and then of course to fire. But there's a metaphor that has nothing to do with an abstract comparison to a fruit or to a material, but stems from the location in which Torah was delivered to man, Bamidbar Sinai. So Chazal want to know why the Torah is delivered in a midbar. So this also has 5 or 6 different elements to it. I just want to discuss maybe 2, maybe 3, depending on how much time we have. I want to keep these shiurim more or less under or close to 20 minutes. So the first reason, and a lot of this is based on the Torah I heard from my Rebbe, Rav Amital, and I spoke about this earlier this week in one of the shiurim that I gave to the boys after davening, so if you've heard some of it, you skip ahead in the video. Some of this is new. That unlike the city life, or urban areas, or certainly gardens, which are, and homes, in residential areas, which are owned by people, and that ownership means people can claim it as theirs. The midbar is wild, untamed, uncivilized, owned by no one. Not just it's owned by no one, but it refuses, it denies ownership, it prevents ownership. And the contrasting image would have been if, let's say, the Torah would have been delivered in Eretz Yisrael, where you and I, everyone else would have thought it to be the most appropriate location. It would inevitably have to be delivered in a strip of land or an area of land that belonged to one of the Shvatim. And that Shevet would then have called rights to Torah, would have felt that they own Torah, would have broadcast that their way is the way to study Torah and to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because after all, they're constantly living in the afterglow of Har Sinai. Let's say all the Shvatim would have gathered to the Chelek of Zevulun on the coast. That would have been very romantic, very dramatic. As the sun sets over the ocean, Hashem delivers the Torah. But they would have returned home, and the Zevulun people would have said, but we see Har Sinai-like events every day, and therefore listen to us, and our form of practicing Avodas Hashem is primary. And again, we've lost some of our Shevet identity, but when we did have Shvatim, and maybe one day we will recover Shvatim, 2 days in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, whether the Aseret HaShvatim will or will not return during Yemos Mashiach, this was very proprietary and unfortunately, to a degree, very competitive. There are moments both in Yehoshua and in Sefer Shoftim where Shvatim rivalries start to erupt and surge, and of course the most nefarious instance is the war between 11 and 1, the 11 Shvatim against Binyamin, during that very sordid story of Pilagish Begiva, a woman who was unfortunately murdered in a mountaintop or a Pisgah cliff in Binyamin, and the Shvatim could not tolerate such behavior in Binyamin, and 65,000 people lost their lives. But getting back to Torah, and this is how Rav Amital would call it, Hashem wants to deliver a message by delivering it in a place belonging to no one, so that we realize, and here's Rav Amital stretching it beyond just the Shevet context, God, Reuven, Yisachar, Ein monopol l'Torah. There is no one way to learn Torah. And Hashem places it in a desert because there isn't really one owner of the desert. Now, what does it mean, Ein monopol l'Torah? I think it means two things intellectually and one thing culturally. So let's start with the intellectual. Number one is there is no one way to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not just to learn Torah cerebrally and cognitively, but to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And sometimes people, sometimes younger people, but not only, have a hard time separating their passion from their ration. Hashem infused us with passion, which means we have the ability to love something so deeply and be so certain of it and so convinced, because otherwise we couldn't love it that deeply, that that's the only way. That's what love is. That's what passion is. But you need the maturity and the dexterity, the emotional dexterity, imaginative dexterity to take a step back and say, well, can I imagine a different way? Can I imagine a different way? Different love? So I was compared to chocolate and vanilla ice cream. I really dislike chocolate ice cream. I love vanilla ice cream. The times I get to eat vanilla ice cream right now are very rare because I have to watch my health. But if we go to an ice cream store, a load of vanilla ice cream, maybe some cherries inside, maybe some what they make now, the lotus ice cream, but it's vanilla based. And I hate chocolate ice cream. I'll throw it down if I have to. But can I imagine that people have a taste for chocolate ice cream? Of course I can, but I love vanilla. And it's my ration speaking in one side of my mouth that I know people can enjoy chocolate ice cream. It's my ration speaking different side of my mouth. And the same thing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is a derech to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Your derech, your masara, your hashkafa, your way of bringing it all together, that you should be so in love with that you can't imagine. You can't imagine anyone doing it differently. But then you stretch your mind and you say, well, maybe there is a different way, it's just not me. So I tell Talmidim all the time, if any Rebbe says, and means it, sometimes it's just a slip of the tongue, this is the only way to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just walk out the door. It's not just a moral crime, it's intellectually bankrupt and borders almost upon paganism. The assumption that the human mind can take HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the access points of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and shrink it into a way that the human mind can be certain of. It's not really avodah zarah, but it borders on the same concept. Hashem is infinite. And just like no human reference points can describe him, that would be real paganism. Similarly, no human reference points can describe access to him because he's just beyond human access in the way that we know. If a Rebbe says, this is my derech to serve Hashem, this is my masara, and this is what I've been trained as, and I'd like to share it with you if you feel that it calls you as well, that's beautiful. That if Rebbe wants to share his derech and endow it to a Talmud, to a child, to the next generation. Hu hadin v'hi hanosenes with Talmud Torah. You would think, okay, well, maybe there's more than one way to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Talmud Torah, there's a right way to study Torah. It isn't, because Torah is the collective will of Hashem, the approximated will of Hashem, but even Torah is infinite. And the same thing. I use this mashal all the time. Maybe you've heard from me. I don't mean to pick on the Marsha. I say it just because the Marsha's type of learning is very, very far from the brisker learning that most yeshivos across the world, in one way, shape, or form, pursue today. Now, I don't know what's out there, and I know the people that learn in the Chafetz Chaim type yeshivos will read every Marsha, but I imagine that the people that are learning in brisker settings out there, or have learned in brisker settings out there, ask yourself honestly, how many Marshas have you actually learned? The Marsha is dealing with a completely different element of the Sugya. For that matter, okay, it's a little different, the answer to this question is a little different. How many Pnei Yeshuas have you learned? Okay, now there's a big gap, but compared to how many Ritvas that you've learned, how many Pnei Yeshuas have you learned? It's probably 1 to 10. For those who are into Reb Chaim inspired Achronim, how many Pnei Yeshuas have you learned? 1 second. That don't appear in Reb Elchanan or the Brisker Rav or later Brisker Svarim. How many of you pure Pnei Yeshuas compared to pure Reb Elchanans or pure? Again, it differs from place to place. Brisker style is different to Brisker style. Now, if I had 1,000,000 lives to lead and 1,000 years and everyone knows 1,000,000, of course I'd want to hunt down every single nugget of Torah truth in every single angle and every single perspective. Wow, look how little time we have to study Torah. So each person has to find Sein Cholkeinu B'Sarasecha. So again, if a Rebbe says, this is my derech of learning, and this is why I choose to learn what I choose to learn, and what I don't choose to learn because I discard it, but because I just don't have time to study it as much, that's beautiful. The Rebbe says, this is the derech and the other derechim are me. Again, it's so off base, and it displays such a lack of Torah wisdom. I always use those words. It's relatively easy to get Torah knowledge. It's a lot harder to get Torah wisdom. I know a lot of people have a lot of Torah going through them. I'm not sure when I hear things that it's reflective of how I feel Torah's wisdom should be voiced and articulated. So that's cognitively, ein monopola Torah. Culturally, it's the same thing. I think I may have talked about this in Truma, so if so, I apologize for repeating myself, but it's always good to chazer. And that is, in some ages, in some eras, Torah becomes so wildly successful, and so many people pursue it, that there becomes a culture surrounding Torah, and being part of that culture is part of your ticket into Talmud Torah, at least in some people's minds. So let me be as realistic and as genuine as I can. I'm sitting here, and I'm putting on a white shirt, because that's what I do for these shiurim, but if you came and saw me walking down the street in Israel, I'd probably be wearing a gray shirt or a blue shirt and a regular pair of pants, not even Shabbos-style pants, regular black pants. I'm pretty low-key to my dress. But I don't have the look, and I don't wear a hat, and I don't wear a jacket, and I don't dress in white and black every day, because whatever, the world I'm in Eretz Yisrael, those are the codes, and I follow the codes. But for many people, it's not just about how you learn and what you say and what your Torah is. Maybe you're listening to this, you find me jarring without a beard, and without the right shirt, and without the right hat, and without the right spracht, and I don't speak yeshivish, and I'm not really a part of that culture. I just learn Torah, and I try to share Torah with whoever wants to hear. And for some people, there's an emes of Torah that requires a cultural positioning, and a way of speaking, and a way of identifying, and that's certainly not the way I see Torah. It's certainly not the way Amital taught me to see Torah. I see Torah as this cosmic, unlimited will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that descends to this earth, and people create cultural vehicles to better process them and to better absorb them holistically, because Torah is not just cognitively, it's experientially, but codes and cultural norms, just as they facilitate and enable, they also limit and they filter, because you're hearing it through a certain secondhand, this is the way it's meant to be. So, for example, sometimes when I look at, let's say, the Torah learning that's coming from some of the yeshiva Shavel, it's just amazing, the quantity and the depth and the resonance. So when I'm learning Bava Kama or Gittin and I read some of the Torah that's being written, it really strikes me, it really touches me. And then when I read, let's say, sometimes some of the Machshava, less so, at least for me. And to me, at least, it seems like there's a lot of filtration going on, and things are being repeated a lot, because once you code yourself, the verb, C-O-D-E, you find yourself limiting what you can think about, because the codes create certain accepted ways of thinking and not. Of course, I'm super generalizing. I'm sure you could find people that live in that world that break through the codes, but it's just structural, and you build a code, and the code helps you because there's such a strong group of people that are rowing in the same direction. But it's very hard to turn the rudder a little whenever it's rowing in the same direction. You're expected to row in the same direction. So the Gemara thinking, by definition, is very linear. It's a very distinct cognitive way of thinking, whereas Machshav is much more 180 panoramic. What do you think this Medrash is telling you, as opposed to that Medrash, rather than homogenizing? Anyway, so without the social commentary, but it's interesting to think about, and I hope I'm being able to convey this, and I'm able to convey this without judgmentalism, and that's just simply the way it strikes me, the world of Torah. The second reason that Torah is presented in a desert, I don't remember if Amital spoke about this, but to me, I'm trying to list off the two fundamental ones, and I'll say something which Amital creatively introduced into my thinking, is that Torah is beyond time and beyond place. And Hashem wants us to have a sense that when we encounter Torah, we're leaving this earth, and leaving our space, and leaving civilization, and leaving society, and encountering something of the other, of the Ratzon Hashem. And the T word, the transcendence of Torah, has to be maintained. And getting back to briskers who analyze and deconstruct and organize and try to control and conquer Torah, which Hashem wants us to, sometimes you can lose the transcendence of Torah, the mystique of Torah, the mystery of Torah. So I've authored a series of shiurim over the past 30 years called Talmudic Methodology, and I'm trying to show people that learning is not just chaotic, and it's not just serendipitous, and it's not just random, but there are 150 tools that you just see repeating and repeating in ways that you're able to read the Gemara and see what Rishonim are doing. And Torah is not comprehensive, but trying to provide people with a methodology. But once you methodologize Torah, you can run the risk of losing it. Again, if you have a supple enough mind, you can hold two ideas at once. You can control Torah, and the irony is, the more that you control it, the more that you know you can't control it, right? Until I started learning a little bit, I didn't realize how vast and how dynamic and how expansive and how uncontainable, uncontrollable Torah was. And the more that I learn and the more that I organize, I realize, well, now that I know what I know, I try to know it well and deep, I have an even better sense of how little I know. And that's the great irony of Torah. But Hashem wants to take us somewhere else. And of course, that could have been outer space. And let's say the Torah were given in a world in which people felt outer space and could travel to outer space. I believe one of the metaphors for Torah would have been outer space. But people have such a remote sense of outer space. So the closest you come to being somewhere else on this world beyond time and place is the Midbar. And the absence of space that's beyond human experience, beyond space cut to human size, is the fact that we don't really know when the Torah was given. I mean, we know we can calculate, but there's a machlokas, vav sivan, zayin sivan, and the Torah never announces when the Torah was given. So there's this encounter with the Rabbanu Shalom that's midbar, that's unknown, it's beyond, and you have to try to taste that when you study Torah. You can't just be, what does it mean to me? And the irony is, the easier Torah becomes to learn, the harder it becomes to remain, the harder its transcendence to be preserved. So now, Art Scroll and Schottenstein in Israel have done such a great job of paving Torah as one single path. You just walk down, and the valleys and the mountains are all paved and even-keeled, which is an amazing development over the last who knows how many years. But sometimes you lose the sense of struggling over a sugya. And when you struggle over a sugya, because it's harder than the other one, you realize this is something beyond human ken and human reach. The third reason the Torah was given in the Midbar, this is something Rav Amital spoke about, is that the Torah is meant to prevent human beings, society, from falling into a midbar-like state of chaos, lawlessness, barrenness. Again, we don't believe that man was created inherently evil, but he has the Yitzhahara, and if left to his own devices, there are chances that he'll generate a Dor Mabel or craft a Anshe stone. So the Torah is meant to give us regulations and morality and ethics and values. Of course, those are all driven from the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or drawn from the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Torah is actually meant to oppose. It's like it's entering the desert and tilling it, T-I-L-L, cultivating it, creating human habitat where it didn't exist before. And I think there are midrashim about that the desert bloomed when the Torah was given, so there's actually a visual that supports this. But that's not where Rav Amital stopped. But it is true also that just like Torah is meant to prevent society from slipping into lawlessness and chaos and emptiness, it's also meant to prevent society from developing cultures that are decayed, that maybe are functioning but are decayed and are rotten and have adopted values, maybe like our own, that are unhealthy morally and religiously and spiritually for humanity. And that's why, if you look at Yerushalayim, now moving from the Torah being delivered in a desert to Yerushalayim, and those of you will be in Yerushalayim tomorrow, so if you face the kotel and you turn your back to the kotel, you'll see city. But if you turn your face towards the kotel, as someone's calling, I just wanted to cancel the call. If you turn your face toward the kotel, then you're looking at the desert, because there's desert that stretches from Yerushalayim all the way to the Dead Sea or the Jordan River. That's why in Shir Hashirim, when the woman comes to visit the man, and of course in Shir Hashirim the woman is Knesset Yisrael and the man is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the man is a king and he's in Yerushalayim, the capital, and she's coming from the desert because she lives in En Gedi. She lives in En Gedi. I'm going to just shut this. So, how do I do this? So, okay, whatever, it will disappear. It disappeared on my screen. So she's coming from the desert, and he says, Mi zot olam min hamidbar. Who is this woman coming from the desert? Because she's traveling from En Gedi to Yerushalayim. So if you're traveling from En Gedi to Yerushalayim, you're going to be seen in Yerushalayim is coming from the desert. So geographically or topographically, Yerushalayim is surrounded on one side by civilization, on the other side by the desert, because it's meant to prevent humanity from falling into a desert, but also prevent humanity from building civilizations and cultures and societies that are morally flawed or morally deficient. And for Rav Amital, this was an important point. Let me take a minute or two just to elaborate. For Rav Kook, not only is redemption universal, but universal events feed redemption. That's two important points that are very different. Redemption is universal means it's not just intended for the Jewish people. It's not just that a fiery, apocalyptic fireball is going to come down from heaven and incinerate everyone who's not a Jew, but there will be people who will be removed from this earth in the Yom Adin, people who are Rishayim. But just the same, there are people who will see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but gather in Yerushalayim, and they'll feel. So when we're redeeming the world, we're redeeming it on behalf of humanity. But for Rav Kook, it's more than that. As humanity advances, and he saw modernity as an advancement in science and technology, in health and food and economy, everything, society is improving, capitalism, democracy, technology, science. This is something that's evolving and advancing human history towards this utopia, which can only be reached through the Yad Hashem, of course. It can only be reached through Bias Mashiach, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Gila Shechina. But this is all part of it. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way, or a lot of people don't realize they don't see it that way. If they think about it, they would see it that way, but there's a word trap when people use the word modern as the opposite of religious. That person isn't so religious, that person is more modern. Well, first of all, I don't like the first part of that sentence, I don't like the second part of the sentence. I don't like the first part of the sentence because I don't have a religious thermometer to see who's more religious or not, and I think we have to learn how to stop using those terms. I wrote about that in this article that will appear this week in the Jerusalem Post. And no, it's actually Nasaf, to get ahead of myself because of Shavuos. But even if we did have a religious thermometer, the opposite of religious is not modern. The opposite of religious is, in theory, less religious. If you think about yourself, not other people, of course. And by saying that, you trap yourself into assuming that everything modern is religiously toxic and religiously flawed. That's certainly not Rav Kook's view. And the advances, and I don't think it's true ideologically, I also don't think it's true experientially, which means that you don't feel firm when you're doing modern things. And basically, we're surrounded by modern elements and experiences. So you really are streamlining and shoehorning firmkeit into a very small space. Be that as it may, for Rav Kook, the advance and changes politically, economically, scientifically, medically are all part of bringing humanity to a more perfect state. Of course, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can confer the final utopia. Rav Amital was very influenced by this, and he would oftentimes, primarily politics, less so science, but primarily politics, he would comment on different political changes, which many Torah Jews would ho-hum. It's okay, it's nice it happened, but it doesn't really factor into this surge towards Malchus Hashem. But for Rav Amital it did. And in the 90s, as communism fell, he thought this was a favorable moment, not just because Jews would be able to emigrate, but conceptually, even for Russians, even for Cubans, when communism would fall. It's because this is a godless, desert-like culture that we are meant to prevent humanity from sinking into. On the other hand, Torah is meant to, he worried, and this is a little prescient of him, that in the early 90s, when the West was humming along and it defeated Nazism 50 years earlier, defeated communism now, and it really had no particular enemy, so now he was worried that maybe this hyper-liberalism without any unifying narrative, my words, would turn in on itself and would have nothing to live for. And this is, unfortunately, the malaise which many of us feel Western civilization is suffering through, where it's beginning to tear down, or parts of it, its own institutions, and to be embarrassed of its own accomplishments, and to turn in on itself and self-immolate. So for Amital, that was Yerushalayim's dual role to both, or Torah's dual role, to both prevent something from turning into a Midbar culture, and also to prevent civilization from going off the rails. See, it's already 23 minutes. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Zman Matan Torah, and Yom Yerushalayim Sameach if you're listening to this by any chance during or before Yom Yerushalayim.